Back, and many thanks for staying with us right here on the #1 breakfast show in the country, Morning at TV. It will be detrimental to continue with this show minus shining a light on our sponsors. ITEL Uganda is one of our sponsors. Please do go and clamor for their technological services in that regard. U-Lesson app is that app, magical as it is, that you would, as a learner, maximize on as long as you have the internet. You have an iPad, you can connect. Yes, you can actually get on there without a teacher, or, or a parent within your presence. You can just do it on your own. As long as you have internet, you have an iPad, a small phone that actually connects onto the internet, and you have downloaded the U-Lesson app, you'll be able to actually continue with your learning on the internet. Minute Maid is also one of our sponsors. If you woke up and yes, your creative processes have been dogged a little bit because you came out of a state of deep slumber, just take a sip of Minute Maid and you resuscitate your body's creative processes in that regard. It's a triple encounter of sponsors on the show. That aside, the COVID-19 pandemic is still pretty much rearing its very ugly head. 270.4 million plus infections have been registered on the whole global stage. Ladies and gentlemen, remember, when we vacated this studio on Friday, we were grappling with some 268 million plus cases of COVID-19. So ideally, we've added over 1.7 million plus cases of COVID-19 over the weekend, owed to the Omicron variant, B11529, that has 50 mutations, 32 of which will enter your body and infect those human cells in your body, causing adverse health events taking center stage. Hospitalizations will increase and so forth. So wearing of a face mask, social distancing, and also vaccinations are the way to go. If you've received your first and second vaccination, please think about the third booster jab in that regard. Pfizer is saying the vaccine will increase protection if you take the third booster jab. Moderna is also saying the same. Away from that, it should also be cognizant for our viewers to know that COVID-19 is not the only disease killing people. 7.7 million people this year alone. Smoking has killed 4.7 million people this year alone. Alcohol has killed 2.3 million people this year alone. Malaria has killed more than 300,000 people this year alone. Simple flu has killed more than 400,000 people this year alone. So it is cognizant for our viewers to understand that more diseases are killing people. Missed is the ED for FOWODE, that is the Executive Director for the Forum for Women in Democracy, and she's none other than Patricia Munabi. She's joining me to talk about the 25 or so years of this very amazing group, FOWODE, what they've been, clamoring to achieve over the last 25 years. We are going to be interrogating that since 1994. Women's participation in politics, inclusive participation of the women, how has it been since then? We shall take a look at some of the achievements that have been achieved or garnered in that regard. What were the misses, and how do we ensure inclusive participation in the spheres of politics and economics of their country moving on from now? Well, thank you for joining us, Patricia Munabi.
Thank you very much for welcoming me, and
Indeed.
Good morning to our viewers.
Indeed, a lengthy preamble, if you will, into this conversation. My apologies, but here we are. Let's talk about FOWODE, the Forum for Women in Democracy. What should the viewer know about this beautiful organization?
Thank you very much. So the Forum for Women in Democracy is a women's rights organization.
Indeed.
We were born in 1994 out of the constitution-making process. So during the Constituent Assembly, 9 women came together and thought that it was important to ensure that Uganda got a gender-responsive constitution. So they worked with other special interest groups, including other women, the workers, the youth, with people with disabilities, and also brought on board a group they called gender-sensitive men, who they could work with as the constitution-making process went along, to ensure that each of the clauses of that constitution were as gender-responsive as they could be. So we all know that the 1995 constitution came with many gains for women.
Indeed.
It came with affirmative action, which saw more women getting into the political realm. It came with specific articles on women's rights. And so the constitution was gender responsive. And indeed, Uganda was hailed as having one of the most gender responsive constitutions in 1995. So riding on the momentum of a gender sensitive constitution, Forum for Women in Democracy was born to pursue a vision of a just and fair society where both women and men equally participate in and benefit from decision making. So that's how this organization was born. And one of the first activities that the organization did then was to go around the country to sensitize the women on the gains that had been made in the constitution for them. You all know that prior to the Constituent Assembly, Uganda had very few women in decision making, in leadership. Very few women were participating in politics. So here was an opportunity that women needed to take advantage of, and that's how this organization was born. And since then, we've been working on building and nurturing women's leadership. We've also been working on advocating for distribution of resources that is equitable between women and men, girls and boys.
Indeed.
So that is who we are as an organization. We are national in character. We are working currently in 13 districts in Uganda. Being donor funded, of course, we can't go all over the country, but we are making our contribution in addition to all the other organizations that are working towards a more just and fair society.
Take me to the 2 years after the creation of this organization, the Forum for Women in Democracy, because I understand you were birthed in 1994. We did have our first election in 1996. Talk to me about the participation of women in the politics of the country during that year. Was it increasing based on the analogy that you had, been expediting some few activities to rally women to rise up and participate?
So the beauty that the Constitution came with was affirmative action.
I see.
So it was therefore important that women were aware of the space that had been created and that they actually fronted themselves for these positions. Because we know, for example, the Constitution came with a slot for a woman representative for each district. It came with slots for women with disability, the youth, including young women, and so on. So the first activity that the organization did was this rallying of the women to know what was in the Constitution, to encourage them to participate, because at the end of the day, these slots needed to be filled by women. And so when we get to the election in 1996, we see women coming up and filling these positions. And so that's why we hail this organization, because it championed affirmative action and the importance of women having a voice in the public arena.
Besides women having a voice in the public arena, what were some of the other challenges, Patricia, dogging women's participation in politics at the time? You're talking about the 90s. What were some of the challenges back then?
Of course, one of the challenges that continues to dog women's participation even today is the whole issue of patriarchy and how women are perceived and whether they actually belong to the public sphere. Exactly. So for a very long time, women were seen as belonging to the private sphere and not the public sphere. So this meant that we also needed to raise the awareness not only of the women about the provisions that had been made, but also of the men, their counterparts in the communities, to be able to support the women in leadership. So patriarchy and perceptions about where the woman should be was then and still is an issue that we need to continue to talk about, with the hope of getting more citizens on board the agenda of supporting women in leadership.
Well, of course, patriarchy played a big role back in the day, dogging women's participation in politics. In the last election cycle, violence took center stage. Women were actually telling me even before we cast the vote, Romy, I'm not going anywhere near a polling station. And my question was, why? And then the ladies were like, well, because of the violent nature of the campaigns. You see people being rounded off left, right, and center. Where do I get the assurance that when I go to this polling station, I'm not going to be violated in that regard, simply because I voted for someone whom, these individuals do not like? And I was like, it is a secret ballot. And they were like, nonetheless, we are not going to the polls. So let's talk about that, the violent nature of politics. Is it stopping women from participating?
So one of the things that we have come across as we encourage women to participate in leadership and in the political sphere is this whole issue of violence. And it is not only violence in the elections, it is violence even in the homes.
Wow.
Because the issue I talked about patriarchy and men having to allow their wives to actually be able to participate. Sometimes when there are differing views, it causes violence within the home.
I see.
So the political arena has come with violence in the home as well. Now, when we get to the political sphere, it is even worse. At the Forum for Women in Democracy, we did a study that we called Deterred Not Bad, Violence Against Women in Elections. it is simply frightening, the amount of violence that there is within political parties, within the whole context in which we operate. And indeed, as you have said, this causes women to pull back because women are naturally negotiators, they are peacemakers. And remember, they also bear in mind as they go about all these processes, the gender roles that they need to play for their families and so on. So it is indeed true that violence did keep some women away from the polls, but these are conversations that we need to continue to have. Because at the end of the day, if we are talking about a full democracy, if we are talking about equal participation, both men and women need to be able to participate. And that's why some of these issues we are in as organizations for the long haul, because it will take quite a bit of time to change culture, to change perception, to change political parties and how they perceive women, to think about the whole electoral context. So these are conversations that we continue to have. And also to add that we are not in this only as the Forum for Women in Democracy. We are working with the broader civil society to see how we can make our contribution to making the space more friendly for more women to participate in politics and leadership.
Indeed, this is a very compelling conversation because you're telling us even within their homes, these women were actually subject to some kind of resistance when it comes to participating in politics. A man will not only tell her, do not go out and work, he can also tell her, do not go out and vote in that regard. Because
he can even stop her from running for an election. So it is all sides of the coin.
Men are stopping women from participating in politics from the family level.
Yes, they are. But some of the work that we have done is making a contribution to changing some of these things, because we have realized that unless we engage communities as a whole, rather than single out the women, we will not be able to achieve what we'd like to achieve as an organization and also for democracy and participation in the country. So some of these are beginning to change. As I said, it is going to take some time, and we need to stick in there to make this thing work.
And of course, it is a misconception, if you will, that women cannot, you know, do what a man can do. But largely, why are these men, you know, adamant to let their women participate in politics?
I think, as I said, it is culture.
Culture?
It is how they have been brought up, the social construction, to believe that the woman belongs more to the private sphere, participate more in the domestic environment, do the unpaid care work, rather than on the public, in the public sphere.
Patricia, let's talk about the rationale for just societies. You know, how does it benefit the society overall?
I mean, think about a bird with one wing.
Indeed.
It cannot fly. It cannot fly.
Yes.
So in talking about just societies and the equal participation of both men and women, we are saying, how can both genders, how can both women and men be able to participate? How can they work together? Because if you have more than half of the population not participating, it has an effect on families, on communities, on national development. Because at the end of the day, they are not participating as they should be in the economy, for example.
No one will speak on their behalf. Largely, we have women in agriculture. So if you had women, more women in politics, they would come up with policies that will help other women within the agricultural sector. Indeed. So we need more women in leadership so that they could come up with voices that help other women in the settings out there.
Yes,
is it
that is true.
Yes.
But we need women in leadership that will make this leadership deliver.
I see.
We need leadership to deliver for the women, because we currently have the numbers, don't we, in Uganda?
I hear you on that
Is it actually delivering for the women? So as we go into the next 25 years as an organization, we are looking to see how can we make the leadership actually deliver for the women?
And that's where the problem is. We are having people who are saying maybe affirmative action is not working as we expected it to, because you're saying you have a representable number of women in leadership, but are they actually coming up with the tangible policies that you need to help other women? So affirmative action, is it really working like we wanted it to? Or are these women also entering these positions of leadership and amassing wealth on their own?
So first of all, to emphasize that affirmative action was important in the first place to get the women in.
Now they are in.
Otherwise, would have spaces, would have a parliament probably that has very few women. I mean, if you look at the numbers of women that came through on the mainstream seats currently, very minimal in comparison to the women on affirmative action. So yes, the numbers are important. Let me also add that these numbers have actually delivered something for the women. Think about the several gender-responsive laws that have come into being over the past few years, mainly because the women were in the space, they were able to talk for these issues, and we have therefore been able to win vital laws for women. So we have the Anti-Female Genital Mutilation Act, we have the Domestic Violence Act, we have, you know, we have several laws that have come into place.
So you're saying...
So this is to say that the numbers have delivered. We are saying, how can we make these numbers deliver even more for the women, so that some of the things that continue to plague the woman of this country can be dealt with?
And I've also had pointers where, you know, Alice was saying we need to create a more conducive environment where we get more women participating in the politics of their country and not necessarily using affirmative action. The conducive environment should actually egg women to participate and, you know, assume these positions of leadership, and not only the issue of affirmative action.
And as I mentioned earlier, it takes talking to the political parties, getting them sensitized about why the women should be in the spaces, because the political parties are a vehicle through which both women and men get into the political space. It's also about having more gender-responsive laws. For example, thinking about the electoral laws. How can these laws be amended to ensure that more women are given space to participate? So it is a lot of work that needs to be done.
It's been over 27 years since, you know, Forum for Women in Democracy was birthed, 1994. We'd like to talk about the new leadership center you are trying to work on. $7.8 million US. Yes, and you're starting the groundwork in March of 2022 next year. Talk to me about that.
So let me begin by saying we have achieved a lot as an organization.
Indeed, Patricia.
We have strengthened women's leadership and movement building by championing the collective from the grassroots. We have championed affirmative action, as I mentioned, that brought more women into the public arena. We lobbied for the establishment of the Equal Opportunities Commission during the constitution-making process to promote equal opportunities for both men and women. We secured pioneering legislation on ensuring that, you know, budgets address the needs of both men and women. So we have achieved quite a lot over the years. So we want, as we go into our legacy initiative, to build on our solid base of knowledge, of experience, of trust, and of a collective vision. So as I mentioned, we have nurtured transformative leadership. We have enabled women to gain voice in the public arena. We have helped women to win vital laws and resources. But
how will this leadership center be a game changer?
But there is still much more to do.
Yes,
and that's why we thought about this legacy initiative, our leadership center, that is going to be the driving force as we go into the next 25 years. So this leadership center is going to be a space that provides an opportunity to facilitate women's own independent voice, where women can go and strategize and reflect and think about how they engage with the future. Many women also face a lot of pressure from powerful forces and from even within their communities. So this will be a safe and empowering space where women can feel free, where they can introspect and lay strategies on how they launch campaigns as they go into the future. Now, we have said we need to make leadership work for women. It is important that we continue to strengthen women's leadership in institutions, in decision-making, and also in change processes. So we'll continue to build this women's leadership so they can have independent and authentic voice and set their own agendas, and also lay strategy for how they can take on those powerful positions in communities, in organizations, and also in the political sphere.
Patricia Munabi is the Executive Director for the Forum for Women in Democracy. Many thanks for having made the time to speak to us about this important subject. Thank you very much for coming through. And of course, we need to do more, yes, to help women in that regard. Affirmative action was working and still does work, but we need to create a conducive environment through which that normal, ordinary girl from Chaza can actually skyrocket from the pits of hell, if you will, and all the way to stardom in terms of politics without anyone, you know, touching her hand or helping her. Just the environment being conducive in that regard. We should be able to help women, yes, participate in the politics of their country. Our next conversation is largely going to be focusing on promoting worm farming for economic empowerment. I'll be talking to Alicia Namakula, the co-founder of Women Economic Empowerment Uganda, and also Florence Nambiru, the co-founder of the same organization. The conversation will be coming to you shortly after this break.